Hi, I'm Dr. Danielle Morgan. I'm an associate professor in the Department of English with a courtesy appointment in the Department of Ethnic Studies. My area of specialization is 20th and 21st century African American literature and culture, with a particular emphasis in comedy and satire. One of the main research goals I have in my writing and my teaching is thinking about the way satire and comedy operate as forms of social justice. So sometimes when I start talking to students about this, we think about it as a kind of new phenomenon, right? Thinking about comedy and satire as political in the 20th and 21st century. But actually, this has really always been a part of what comedy and satire do, especially in African American literature and culture. If we think back to somebody like Frederick Douglass, who even as far back as 1852, in his famous speech, "What to the Slave is the 4th of July," he talked about his desire to use satire, to use irony, to awaken the soul of the nation in the abolitionist cause. And so we can see even back in the 19th century, this idea of satire as opening up an ethical terrain in the United States, in America. So we're continuing this sort of historical trajectory, thinking about the way satire operated then and how we're still seeing it being utilized now to open up this space for thinking of personal autonomy, for thinking about how we articulate ourselves, how we understand the world, and how the world understands us as well. When a satirist creates a satire, they feel empowered to attack or to critique or take aim at someone who has some sense of discernible power greater than theirs. So this is where we get the satires that are talking about people in position of powers, and also organizations or sort of entities, the government, the nation writ large. We find this to be reasonable and ethical because it's somebody who has less power sort of staking a claim to their own power. What Punching Up also allows is this sense of plausible deniability. Because we often sort of write off comedy as just jokes, it's just funny, it doesn't really matter, the satirist is allowed to really kind of precisely poke fun at or indict the target, while ultimately saying, hey, you said it's just jokes, you said it doesn't matter, so I'm just kidding, right? This idea of just kidding as a form of protection and plausible deniability. Within the context of my classroom, my students often acknowledge that they're really excited to study comedy and that they get to exist in this space of joy and rigor. Of course, the material is often really fun, but not always. My students come in very prepared to work, and I've been so impressed both within the context of my classroom and with the research assistants I've had in the work that they have accomplished in these classes. We are really engaging in rhetorical analysis, thinking about the ways the words themselves are used to enact spaces of power and of self-autonomy. We think about this kind of comparative lens, thinking about these critical, deep, really dense, complicated philosophical tracks and comparing them to memes and TikToks and sitcoms and stand-up comedy. How do we take what's theoretical in the classroom and move it to that practical application? What is the significance of thinking about comedy as a scholarly subject? And ultimately what we discover is that it really, because of the seeming accessibility of comedy, the fact that people like comedy, people are interested in it because it unites us in this kind of in-group dynamic, that comedy ultimately becomes this lasting historical way to articulate your own identity. And that's so valuable regardless of what field you go into after you leave my classroom, after you leave Santa Clara.